Hi, everyone. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our today's webinar on how AI is reshaping ecosystems, and especially in the context of your role within an IT services company. We have tons of conversations right now with the market on the end user side and with you as IT services vendors, how ecosystems under the, let's say, current developments and pace of AI are changing tremendously. So what we would like to do today is to give you a bit of context in terms of the IT services market, how we see it, and how the importance of ecosystems of all different kinds is evolving, how AI is more and more impacting the IT services business model as we are discussing it every day with you and your peers, and how we see also as some tangible, let's say, outlook, what will be the new approach to partnerships and to IT services business models. So with me today are my two fellows, Nick Mays, and Tom Reuner, based in our London office. They will guide you through the presentation together with me. And before we start the session, let me bring some housekeeping principles to the table. So first of all, we will keep you muted for the session, but you will have the chance to write your questions into the Q&A bar that you can see in the Zoom bar. The session will be recorded, and the slides and the recording will be provided afterwards to you. So no need to write, just listen and discuss with us and enjoy. And did I forget something? We will have a Q&A at the end. So we will go through the questions that you will send us into the Q&A bar, and then we will have enough time to discuss. If not, we will also have enough time for a follow-up to discuss it afterwards. So by saying that, let me just quickly hand over to Nick, who will start the session.
Thanks very much, Stephan, and I'd like to extend my welcome to everyone taking part today. So, as Stephan said, we'd like to start with a little bit of context in terms of where the IT services market is in the first half of 2026, because in the 25 years or so of covering this market, I struggle to recall a more interesting or dynamic or disruptive time for the sector. And I think it's really important before we talk about the impact of AI or some of the other aspects that we're going to talk about and how they're reshaping ecosystems, I thought it was really important to touch upon the four big talking points that come up in pretty much every conversation we have with senior buy-side executives. And I think the four of them will probably be no surprise to anyone on this call today. So, of course, the geopolitical picture is really driving a renewed focus from buy-side organizations in driving agility and resilience. We have the issue of rising compute costs. Costs have already gone up significantly since the start of the year, and we see a lot of buy-side concern about where those prices are likely to head going forwards, given the huge sums of money that the big LLM providers and infrastructure providers are pumping into their offerings right now. The third topic I think has been the big talking point so far this year around the SaaS-pocalypse. Have we already started to see the rise of the big LLM stack providers, completely negate the need for more traditional software applications or SaaS platforms? And for sure, we'll be touching on this a bit more shortly. And then we have the rise of sovereign services. And, this isn't just a talking point in territories like Europe, for example. It's also a big discussion point in areas like the Middle East, in areas of Asia Pac as well. I think, again, there's a lot of concern from the buyers around helping them understand, what's really most relevant to their requirements, given the premium pricing levels that are often attached to sovereign offerings. And Stefan, do any of these kind of leap out to you as being, really front of mind for the buyers that you're speaking to at the moment?
I would say when I go through my conversations that I have with the market, I think definitely number three and four on top of the minds that we are currently discussing. From a European perspective, you can imagine that the sovereignty topic is on top of our minds to have robust discussions, how we can compete also with the big hyperscalers and other big platforms, primarily coming from the US and with this US dominance. And also the SaaS-pocalypse, the capital market is, as you know, really anticipating this kind of future outlook with a strong decrease in stock market price. We see it as an in-between trend and not as the SaaS-pocalypse as some people are writing about, because the lock-in of the SaaS native companies and the application platform providers is still massive in the corporates. So maybe a bit of a news style of content and not too robust, but for sure we have to keep it serious. And we will also go much more into detail how AI is definitely transforming also this type of businesses that we observe.
Yeah, agreed. Um, and one of the, I guess, the real kind of launch pad for us to consider the changing nature of ecosystems. So it was our as we built up our latest view of the leading IT services vendor rankings, and you can see on the left-hand side of this chart here, we've recently published our latest view for 2025 in terms of who the leading players are. And it got me thinking, how has this picture changed over the last, say, 5 or 10 years? Have we seen some big shifts? And I think, the names at the top of the market have been pretty consistent over the last 5 years. And one of the things that, as we kind of ran our analysis on these rankings, one of the things that stood out is if you look at who the leading ecosystem partners are for SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Salesforce, etc., etc. It's this group of these 10 leading vendors predominantly at a worldwide level and indeed at a regional level. And I think that reflects the way the market has been going over the last not just 5 or 10 years, but last couple of decades. It's been those organizations like IBM, Accenture, TCS, Deloitte that have been very successful in building up big scalable practices to support these big platform partners. They're the ones that have really reinforced their position at the top of this marketplace. But as I said, it really made us start to consider if ecosystems are changing, how is this going to start to reshape the role of the IT services provider as well? Now, when we start to think about the importance of ecosystems today, I think this is a really important number to consider. So, our view at PAC is that worldwide IT services spending is going to be a little over sort of 1 trillion euros in 2026. And if you look at the volume of that business that's going to be driven by these big platform logoed players you can see on the right-hand side, it's a little over 50% of the total market is driven by these ecosystems. So it's a hugely important part, a hugely important driver of the market, and it certainly has been to this point. And I think what we're going to consider on this session today is how's that going to evolve going forwards? Because if that 50% is going to significantly change, where are the new revenue streams going to be coming from for ecosystem partners? And I think the other reason we thought it would be a really interesting topic to look at today was that we've seen so many announcements coming out around those big ecosystems in recent months, which really lead to a more disruptive path than we've seen, I would say, for any time in the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years. We're seeing a lot of these big platform providers really start to rethink the incentives programs that they have with partners, the types of partners that they're looking to work with, and yeah, really start to think about new models for engagement with customers, particularly as they transition towards more AI centric product roadmaps. And I would pull out one from the top left-hand side. So the Salesforce ecosystem is a big focus area for me. We've seen earlier this year, Salesforce themselves were one of the platform providers that have announced, a big refresh of their approach to their partner landscape. And a big focus on this is, how they can really bring to the surface those partners that are really able to support, where their customers want to go on the more cutting edge aspects of the portfolio, such as the Agent Force agentic proposition, for example. And Tom, if I can bring you in on this part of the conversation as well. From my perspective, I think this is a really kind of dynamic time in terms of a lot of these big platform providers shaking up their traditional approaches to partnering. What are you seeing on your side?
No, thanks, Nicholas. Dynamic is probably an understatement to some degree, and I think almost three thoughts on that. Perhaps I think on one hand, if you call it out, we're used to think about the traditional ecosystems around SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and beyond. But of course, now with some of the rise of AI, we see new ecosystem evolving. So we have to understand what it means. If it's some of kind of addition, some of to the existing market opportunity, it's cannibalizing. How is that working? But then also we have to keep in mind the old ecosystem mindset was largely the old alliances mindset. So you commit to certain targets with one partner. I think what we are seeing is now of pivoting towards ecosystem orchestration, which is almost the obvious, given that we're moving from almost a handful of central ecosystem to much more as a plethora of ecosystems. So ecosystem, and that's exactly the role service provider can or should play moving forward. But then also that's some of the open questions, some of what are the outcomes of being such an ecosystem orchestrator. So I think we're pivoting in two directions. There's a big discussion. I think you already mentioned it. It's around outcome, but also I think how as can a service provider provide the assurance for some of these most broad ecosystem orchestration. So that's a big shift I'm seeing moving forward. Back to you, Nick.
Okay. I mean, you talk about shifts as well, Tom, and
Yeah.
I would say, whilst we're seeing some big changes amongst the more established platform providers, the SAPs, the ServiceNows, etc., we're also seeing the kind of next generation of platform and stack providers coming through, and they're starting to build out their own ecosystems as well. So, we highlight the likes of Anthropic, OpenAI, Palantir on the left-hand side. All of these companies have been increasingly active in recruiting new consulting system integration partners to support their entrance into the enterprise level of the marketplace. Now, on the right-hand side are some of the most interesting numbers I think that have come out from our research in recent times, and it's to do with, how much IT services spending is attached to different platform types. So basically, the ratios here are the ratio of IT services spending, so consulting, system integration, to the cost of licenses or subscriptions or tokens. So what you're paying to access the platform. And if you start with complex ERP implementations, so a big SAP deployment, for example, that ratio is still, $2 of services spending to every $1 of license or subscription spending. That's come down a lot, by the way, over the last 20 years. I mean, I remember when that was kind of 4 or 5. But it's still in excess of two, and that's been driven down by obviously the transition towards more SaaS-based delivery. In the middle, if you look at the hyperscaler platform related services, that typically operates at a ratio round about zero point 0.5. So here we're talking about AWS, GCP, Azure. You can see it's significantly less. So services companies naturally will have to work harder to build up the kind of revenue streams that they would have got from more traditional ERP implementations. And on the right-hand side, this is the really interesting one. When we look at the services spending that's attached to the likes of Anthropic, OpenAI, or Palantir, on average, it's round about zero point 0.2 times. So, this is significantly lower than the big project revenue streams that have sustained the IT services market for many, many years. And it means it requires a real sort of new way of thinking. And as I said before, we've started to see these emerging platform providers start to build up their own ecosystems, and also they're taking different pathways to how they're doing this. And I think one of the most interesting talking points in the last couple of weeks has been the moves made by OpenAI and Anthropic to build these new consulting vehicles, which Tom, you've done some recent analysis on, and I guess posing the question: are they trying to build their own consulting businesses themselves, or what does this mean for the wider ecosystem? So very keen to get your 2 cents on this.
No, great question. We get so many questions and queries from our some of community on it. And in my mind, I think these two announcements really put all these some of the market development, call it the adoption of AI, under a magnifying glass. And I think if I'm just try to paint with a very broad brush, most commentators look at almost two two aspects of those announcements. First and foremost, allegedly both entering the consulting space, and thereby, of course, they could provide competition to all these some of service property called out in your previous slide. And the second one, some of allegedly, they're both frontier labs throwing their Palantir playbooks on FTEs at a sluggish pace of market adoption. But I don't think fundamentally both OpenAI and Anthropic are somewhat entering the consulting space, but what they're acknowledging is literally what are the pain points, why we see such a more slow adoption of enterprise AI, especially when we're saying moving beyond Gen AI. We come back later on that where we really are. So I think there's some of acknowledging exactly that point where it's quite a realistic sense, quite frankly, where organizations are. But also on the second point, we have to be careful. A lot of commentary sort of looks at the Palantir playbook and suggesting it's all about you have to have FTEs or forward deployed engineer as the best way of scaling that. But I think what that's almost overlooking is not just about having forward deployed engineers, but also, of course, Palantir itself is not really an AI company. It's just building its capability over 2 decades. It's more about a data company, of course, enhancing its capabilities to AI, but it's not almost your typical role model when you think what needs to be done around AI. I think while forward deployed engineers will always play an important role, but it has to be done in conjunction of reimagining operating model, but then also solving the last mile of AI problems. So again, it's all about the end. It's all about the some of deployment and scaling of those things. Having said that, I think what's a good way of reading actually those announcements. I think on one hand, we have to just to state the obvious. They're quite vague announcements. There's so much we don't know as yet. So again, that it's moving development and they're moving targets. But probably the most important context in our view is actually the sort of very likely IPOs of both OpenAI and Anthropic could be even as close as at the end of the year. Also, if you look at the kind of who is involved in that predominantly in those announcements, the big PE firms investing on one hand, but then also both companies can use this PE firm as a distribution channel, just testing out these new models they're developed. And the second point, often to get glossed over, some of when Anthropic had the announcement, they have some of specific focus on the mid-market. But on one hand, focus on the mid-market, not just on AI, but in general, if you look at our IT services and beyond, seems to be obvious because nobody really found the playbook or penetrated from the large service providers the mid-market. But it's fair to say, I think nobody really cracked the market. Yes, we're hearing, for instance, from Accenture, they have another go at the mid-market. That's one thing. So again, as a market leader, Accenture is looking yet again at the mid-market. But then also, if you look at the negative side, think some of the ISVs like ServiceNow, they invested in some of their partners like Platformation to really drive AI adoption in the mid-market. But actually, if you talk to them, if you talk to Platformation, they had to go back to a drawing board because the two key issues in the mid-market are cost of sales and where to get a specialized talent which is necessary to address the requirements of the mid-market. That's not easy to have. So if even a smaller organization like Platformation is struggling, then a lot of learnings coming out of that. And perhaps the last point, as we talk a lot about how that impacting or could be impacting the service provider landscape. The interesting bit, if you look at OpenAI in the last announcement on the deployment company, only Capgemini as an SI has been named with them together with Bain and McKinsey. So the question is that evolving similar what we've seen in the past, Accenture, that the Avanade model around Microsoft? Is it something else? Again, we're early, but it seems to be interesting, if not curious. Then why is not somebody higher up the tree, but why Capgemini, or are there more coming? So, but again, you see there's a healthy tension. It's not just about deploying and bringing the service provider channel into those initiatives, but there's a healthy competitive challenge as well. Back to you, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I think we've kind of shown some of the big points of upheaval in more traditional approaches to ecosystems and how that's changing. The other big aspect, of course, is the wider impact that AI is having on the IT services landscape. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at the shift in a couple of different ways. So what you can see on the left-hand side of the chart here is a view of the total IT services spending. We've got a view for Western Europe here rather than worldwide, and what proportion of that is actually driven by what we could really, clearly define as being core AI related services. And as you can see, I think that the 2 points here are: one, it's a pretty small part of the market today, but it is growing very quickly. And the other point I wanted to move on to on the right hand side of the chart here is, we are seeing a lot of the big ecosystem related services contracts that are being announced have significant elements of either AI enabled service delivery or AI service enablement as part of them. And just to call out a couple here that we've highlighted. So Kela is the big social security administration in Finland. They've entered into a huge multiple million euro contract with Salesforce and PwC as the main implementation partner, really to try and drive a next level approach to harnessing data across the organization, both in terms of how it interacts with citizens and the level of service it supports, but also how it harnesses data internally to drive significant new levels of cost optimization through automation and moving into AI. I would also call out the NATO deal, which I think is particularly interesting, and we do see defence at the forefront of AI adoption, really supporting the wider transformation agenda in that marketplace at the minute. And they're doing some really interesting work with Reply as a system integrator partner, which is very AI centric in terms of supporting core operation modernization. So AI services as a standalone piece, relatively small proportion of the market, but we see it being an increasingly important part of the overall market, and that part of the market driven by the ecosystems as well. And I mean, Tom's kind of touched on this earlier, but in terms of how AI is reshaping the way that projects or IT services work is delivered, I think we've all seen that initial impact felt in areas like test and quality assurance and software development. These have been kind of some of the areas of low-hanging fruit where advances around Gen AI and starting to move towards agentic have really started to make a difference already. And again, I think the situation, it's a little bit like what Stephan was talking about earlier with the SaaS-pocalypse. We have some very bold claims both at either end of the market, and I think the reality is somewhere in between. So we had Palantir's leadership at the start of the year talking about how using their platform could accelerate SAP deployment cycles down to a matter of days or weeks from months. I think again that's a very optimistic view that really understates the complexity of that sort of work. But on the other side, we are starting to see organizations harness automation and AI tools and templates and platforms to really accelerate project delivery. And you can see a couple of examples here from Alstrom in Finland and Festo in Germany. Real evidence of project cycles being significantly sped up through the use of tools that are available on the marketplace today. And Tom, I want to hand the baton over to you here again, really to help provide a little bit more color in terms of the real picture of, how AI is disrupting IT services delivery in 2020, 2026 and looking ahead as well.
No, thanks for that, Nick. And some of one way of looking at it, of course, fundamentally, so if you look on one hand on the service provider side, the key question is literally, you pointed in your last slide, how's delivery changing? But you can, of course, flip it to the other side. How organization procuring those complex services which are necessary for any some of broad transformative services. And if you look to the left-hand side, I think the whole model of the industry is based around labor arbitrage. So in the past, it was always cheaper to throw some of labor in cheap location, offshore, nearshore location at problems than really solving the underlying problems. Then over the years, and if you move from the left-hand side to the right, we looked at automation around RPA and beyond, looked at trying to decouple service delivery or at least routine service delivery from labor arbitrage. We only made incremental progress with it, if I'm honest. Then we shifted, and Nick spoke eloquently at length around the big platforms evolving, moving much more in the direction of having scaled through those platform services, moving towards a big aspiration, of course, here as always being around outcome based. But I think the key thing is move all the way to the right-hand side, and then have various terms out, but probably the best way of encapsulating that is the notion of services as a software. And it's literally some of fundamentally suggesting that technology are the primary some of terms of interaction. If you listen to somebody like Accenture saying that their forecast is literally in 2030, 50% of all interaction in an enterprise will be primarily through technology. It's a fundamental shift, the way we're thinking around that. But there's so much to learn. And if anything, what you heard today, it's around getting a good understanding where we really are with AI, how much agentic AI can really do at this point in time, not as an aspiration where we are back to almost Nick's last slide, just by some of Palantir. And again, Palantir is not the obvious example for service delivery. They're not a services company, even though many service providers feel the disruption could come from them. But again, we have learned so much more about that. But I think the time frame is probably not next year, but it's probably 5 more years. But that's a discussion we should have. How is that changing? We hear all the aspirations in different guises. Some of consulting as code, the way IBM would call it. Again, many talk about services of software, but then also the commercial models will change because we're mirroring, yes, outcome always has to be important, but probably much more around subscription license-based models. Next one, please. And just almost take a step back, as I said, the whole assumption how quickly that change or some evolution is happening comes down to an understanding of where we really are with enterprise AI adoption. And what I'm trying to get across with this slide is, I think most organizations, if you're honest, are at best embracing Gen AI, not even all organizations, so much what we're reading, all the data we flooded on social media, broadly speaking, it's all about Gen AI. Very few have made the next step around some of the agentic AI. But also that's the reason, if you think about you have seen all the messages, some of allegedly only 5% of organizations scaling AI deployment. Very few organizations have realized business value from the often very steep investment in AI because they haven't gone to step all the points you see on the right-hand side. Because if you don't put your organization on the trajectory to enterprise transformation, if you don't think through new operating model, new ways of working, only then you will be able to really capture your business value from your investment. If you don't do that, it's a productivity game. So again, while productivity is welcome, but to move the needle, to literally also communicate that up in your own organization to your CFO, for instance, in particular, it's very difficult. And that's where we see the big disconnect in the industry. But it's also another point we have to change the narratives in our industry. We have to move from almost this obsession about models and technology capabilities. It's all around some of the outcomes, aligning technology and business objectives, but then leaning on operating model reimaginations, all the way solving the last AI model problems. That's the key issues. Only then organization will progress and realize business value. Next slide, please. And just almost bringing that back, as again, I outlined just an understanding, and there might be different views where we are with AI, and we hold it all the one-man unicorns. A lot of people are quite enthusiastic some of probably slightly different than we would be at PAC. But I also bring it back, how are the platforms, how the ecosystems evolving? And of course, it's fair to say, if you look at the headline, the AI stack, some of the ways we're infusing AI into our organization is evolving. There's so much change. Every day things are changing. But if you paint with a broad brush, and we've seen here some of all the points here, some of them it's not one AI stack, everybody's doing the same. They're not on the left-hand side, typically the most investment at the moment around infrastructure. And then, of course, you have the big LMMs, the cognition, the inference models. That's where most investments are at the moment. Then some of you moving on to orchestration. The most important one, coming back to the likes of Palantir, is the data, the context layer. But then again, here we are much earlier in the development. The investments are not steep. And the more you look to the right-hand side, there are some of even less so in some of investments and progress as we think about the execution of all those insights. But then it's so important, we discussed already the news approaches from OpenAI and Anthropic around deployment. But one discussion point we didn't have, and it's so important for the enterprise adoption, is around governance. That's critical. Without governance, providing assurance on the outcome. It's outsourcing 101. You can't abdicate that to your technology provider. But also another point to look at it, some of them is changing, because a lot of discussions around of client interaction we have, it's about capability, capacity commitment. So it's energy and infrastructure. We see new alliances, think about Palantir and NVIDIA getting together to solving some of the quite complex energy consumption problem when we're scaling AI. So again, new some of capabilities coming, new ecosystems coming. What we haven't seen, and again, the OpenAI and Anthropic announcement are the first step in that direction. How can we solve operating model and solving the AI last mile problem? So we need new models, but then here be much earlier. But again, that stack is evolving, but it also gives you some of a good sense how the new ecosystems are evolving. It's not monolithic, and that's a key point. I think here to keep in mind the role, especially for the service provider, but you can extend that even to almost enterprises where they're thinking about consuming, building out their own capabilities. It's about ecosystem orchestration. That's probably some of we have to not enough time to go deep, but that's the aspiration, but also the mindset organization have to that to really bring in all this fairly disparate capabilities. Back to you, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I guess the big question at the end of all this is the kind of so what? So if you're a buyer, if you're a senior buy side executive, what should you be looking from your kind of consulting or SI partner to bring to the table, as part of their role within a wider ecosystem? And if you're one of those ecosystem partners, what's the shift that we see playing out over the next few years that you need to kind of roll with? And what we've tried to do here is pick out sort of 5 key elements. I think Tom touched on this one earlier, but certainly in terms of skills and capabilities, we're definitely moving on from a period where it's those organizations with those very, very deep benches of dedicated experts with high levels of certification. They were the ones that were of the greatest value. I think moving forwards, we're going to see much stronger demand for smaller, agile, multidisciplinary teams that can work across, not just a Salesforce environment, but can also plug in the best of what OpenAI brings to the table, or what Copilot brings if they've already got some sunken cost in that area. I think the focus of a lot of engagements is going to change. I think that's natural as we kind of pass through this latest cycle of big ERP or CRM refresh and modernization programs. So the focus is going to move from, getting things over the line on time, on budget, and a lot of this, of course, recently has been driven by the legacy support deadlines. I think going forwards, what we're going to see is a much clearer focus on driving business outcomes, business value that are going to be enabled through AI. In terms of commercials, and I mean, Tom and Stefan will back me up on this. For 20 years or more, we've been talking about the glacial pace of innovation in terms of commercial models in the IT services sector. It's still fixed
Procurement
price.
hasn't changed, exactly. That's
Yeah, it
why.
never changed. It's
Changed.
fixed price, and T&M still dominates. And even today, with the strong hand that procurement's playing on commercial decisions, Again, that's keeping this pace back. But we are already starting to enter a world where projects are being delivered by human and digital workers. Pricing will have to adapt to accommodate that. And definitely there's always been appetite to move towards more outcome-centric models. Again, I think the possibility of AI and how that can enable that at speed is really going to start to accelerate that shift. In terms of harnessing the platform, I think a lot of the big projects we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years have been focused on a single platform. So help me ensure currency with the latest version and take the cost out of the legacy stuff, the multiple instances that I've built up. Help me kind of streamline and take the fat out of my organization. Again, I think that's going to change going forward. It's going to be about harnessing the most relevant innovation from whichever platform providers they're working with and really be that point of orchestration at the heart of a heterogeneous environment.
Yeah.
And then lastly, where the ecosystem partner adds value. Again, to this point, a big part of the value proposition has been about skills, access to scalable teams to really boost the internal resources that customers have. Again, I think this is shifting, and the key word I hear all the time is context. So help me harness platforms, AI services within the context of my business, my industry, and help me to do that in a way where I'm going to avoid being locked into services that are likely to increase in cost going forwards. And I'll throw to Tom again here. Tom, has anything else stand out for you here? I mean, we've got the kind of overall heading of this slide as orchestration becoming the holy grail. Is that the kind of positioning you see more and more ecosystem partners moving towards?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it is, yes, I'm just sort of just nodding away. So, because if you look at all the complexity, but also the pace of change, so a lot of organizations are looking to partners, hey, how can you help me managing that change, but also mitigating the risk on these fundamental shift? Because there's all this talent coming from for the innovative technology, including AI. It's not even taught at university at scale. So again, it's mitigating that risk, but also you put it out, I think, two things. So we are back to ecosystem orchestration, bringing it all together. But that also means that commercial models have to evolve. You need desperately more insights. While it's easy to populate, or as an analyst say, we have to move toward outcome-centric models, learn the lessons from the early deployments. I think what we're hearing, it's as always, it's very difficult to move away, not least as Nick highlighted just
Yeah.
previously, because where procurement is involved, that's not the world procurement works in at the moment. They want to go back to clear units, what they feel is measurable insight. It's the old world. What we're seeing or hearing from the early deployments is kind of a blended approach. So aspect of outcome, but then blended with a traditional either fixed price or some of headcount, some of elements. So we see a blended, but we need more insights. So again, that's what would be the one where we would love to work with you and providing more of those insights moving forward. But in the end, it boils out down. Outcome always leads to assurance. Again, for mitigating that complexity and risk, service provider have to contract through outcomes, but also through assurance of those outcomes. That's a trend or change we are seeing, Nick.
And maybe to sum that up, Tom, what I see in my projects and conversations, it's also about the intersections between
Exactly.
ecosystems. So
That's a
the
good point.
orchestration is a top
Yeah.
layer in the discussion, but we see tremendous demand also for you as a CNSI or a GSI provider to navigate your clients through this intersections path and to explain where is the big potential lying in adding the LLMs to the ecosystems that are already significantly implemented. Where are the bridges, the intersections? It's a big demand that we currently see for projects in the end user community.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thanks, guys. So, I mean, just before we move to Q&A, and I can see we've got some rather provocative questions coming in already, but just to point you towards some of our recent coverage within PAC, both on the left-hand side in terms of some of our recent analysis and commentary, both on the big established platform ecosystems and also how some of the new emerging ones are being built up. Plus, you can see some links to our more recent market figures covering areas like cloud ecosystem services, AI-related services, and SAP services, which you can follow the links through to from this slide. And on the right-hand side, Stephan, I'll just throw to you, but again, we want to welcome provide an opportunity for people to follow up as well.
Yes, yes. So before we sum up and open the Q&A, some of you may know that we are currently celebrating our 50th anniversary at PAC. So founded back in 1976, 2026 is a big year for us, and hopefully also for our clients working with us. So by celebrating this, we want to gift you a 30 minutes inquiry for free that you can book right away on the right side in the calendar and in the schedule. So please make use of it. Be our guest and organize your sessions with one of our senior analysts, and then we can have a 30 minutes discussion where we can deep dive on your specific questions. So it's on the right-hand side. It's available right now. You can click it. You can also click it when you will receive the presentation. So we would really appreciate to celebrate with you, but also to deep dive with you on the topic of today. And by saying that, thanks for listening so far. I will now directly look into the Q&A feed that we have received. So let me check. Okay, there are a bunch of questions. So let me quickly check. Here's a question that is interesting for us. How is this ecosystems being disrupted by the like of OpenAI and Anthropic themselves coming into the services space through FDEs, etc.?
Oh, it's a good question. And again, what I said, the announcement are so vague. So, but also that's an indicator how early we are. I don't think, again, we have a tendency, not least on social media, we always ask these binary questions. Is one context supplanting another? Is one technology evolution or one announcement meaning literally it's the end for certain? And if I go back, I think I'm going longer in my career than even Nick. So I think I have a lot of gray hairs, but we still have mainframes, which it's never a binary question. It's always much more nuanced. The question is looking at the nuance of those requirements. So I think, but it can break it down. Probably not so much the announcement of and both Anthropic and OpenAI in terms of the deployment company, but the broader question we see, especially coming up on social media all the time. Is AI the end of consulting? You could even say, blow it in our direction. Is that even the end of the analyst job? And I think, again, it's rarely binary. Of course, it means consulting, but also the analysts have to evolve. The more standardization, the more template. If you think about consulting, some of how people think about the likes McKinsey and Bain and all the management consultants, it's not about people in suits with some more standardized templates. I think that's an image of the past anyway. And also there's a lot of vitriol out there on LinkedIn when we hear the stories about McKinsey as that. That's also lazy thinking, quite frankly. The question is, how can these organizations evolve to stay relevant to the class? And all the things we literally discussed today, we couldn't go in all the details, but hopefully we gave you some more flavor how we look at the evolution of AI, what needs to be done to be more relevant to clients. So everybody has to change. Quite frankly, it applies the same way to us. If we think about all the factual research in the past analysts were doing, that's AI will take care of that, but we have to evolve as well. But again, it's rarely black and white. There's almost much more nuance in that. But again, everybody's asking that. I said earlier on Palantir, if you talk to any service provider, that's the first question we're getting from things. But again, we have to engage and will engage in more meaningful and nuanced discussion around that.
Yeah, I would just to pick up on that, Tom. I totally agree, and for sure, it is a threat that will cannibalize certain areas of the IT services market today. Certainly, in terms of how projects are delivered, or whether organizations choose to move away from some traditional SaaS platforms, ERP platforms, and build their own services directly on an LLM stack. That will be the case. It's also an opportunity from the perspective of an ecosystem partner to differentiate, to build something new, to build something that really harnesses AI and AI-driven automation in a way to significantly accelerate time to value. And again, I'd say that word context. I don't think you can underestimate the value of, the role of a consulting partner or an SI partner in joining the dots between the technology stack, be that AI, be that SaaS, and the fundamental way that the client organization works. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon.
No,
Yeah.
good points, and almost two additional points going back. I think, Knight, I really liked your earlier slide on the attachment rates, which also
Yeah.
tells the story in itself. You know how much opportunity was there with the old world of ERP and beyond, and we've seen it already with cloud, how much that changed. So it's almost balancing innovation, but also scale, quite frankly. So you have to scale to, of course, mitigate some of those revenue shortfalls. But what we're hearing out again, some of them are what probably most, at least the more successful service provider will argue we are willing to cannibalize because otherwise some of our peers will cannibalize our deals. And we see that also not least with mid-range other service providers. Think about the likes of Coforge, Emphasis, Persistent. They're picking up significant market opportunities, typically because of two: high specialization, willingness to invest ahead of the market, a bit like an Accenture would do, quite frankly, but then also offering quite compelling, innovative commercial models, and they have the big advantage. Often they don't have the legacy business to really address because they have them on not a big installed base. But we're seeing those dynamics some of changing for quite a while. So again, that change has been with us as long as the industry as how quickly organization can drive that change. And the big one at the moment, how some of decouple revenue from headcount. That's some of we talking nonlinear models forever in the industry, but now with AI, that gets completely different context, but also much more urgency than we ever had before.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions. So sorry to interrupt you guys, but we should accelerate a bit. So I can accept one further question, then we will answer everything else afterwards. Let me check. Here is a question regarding the attach rates on the LLM. So we are forecasting 20 cents per $1 subscription or token in our presentation. And the question is touching on, is the reason for this that the companies and the clients are still scratching the surface only and using mainly the chat interfaces in the Gen AI field and simple API calls, or in otherwise untouched systems, or what is the reason behind?
It's a really good question. I would say that's part of the story today, and for sure, as they extend their reach more and more into critical processes within the client organizations, there will be requirement for a greater role from an external partner, particularly in terms of ensuring the right guardrails are built for how it's used, in terms of integration requirements with other systems, and also driving the all important thing that, I mean, Tom, I know you always talk about the cultural change. So how you help organizations adapt the way they do their day-to-day work to truly harness the full potential of this technology investment that they're making, because unless they change the way that they work, they will never truly harness it. So for sure, there will be programs where that services opportunity is significantly higher. I think there is also going to be a large wave, certainly for the next few years, where it is applied in a way that's really about doing things faster and more cost effectively. I think where it's used much more transformationally, there will be a bigger attached opportunity for the ecosystem partners.
Okay,
It's a
great.
great point. Just looking at this question also, I think broadly speaking, especially when we discuss AI, the business case is always the elephant in the room, and it's much beyond just licensing and the obvious cost. On the contrary, I think it's what you called out, the change management, but also the indirect cost. Looking at the question from that we had this before with SaaS as well, API calls all the way to almost realistic expectation on energy consumption, and you see that almost big CapEx discussion on the infrastructure is changing because too many market participants have unrealistic projection on energy consumption. Of course, we're back to geopolitics that makes it even more complex. But almost a long-winded answer broken down, I think that we need a more nuanced understanding of the business case, all the way extending FinOps to AI to have almost the tools of helping organization with it. But again, as an industry, that's the biggest void, and that's almost where we spend a lot of time as PSC trying to help our client base understand those issues better.
Excellent. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Nick. And thank you to our attendees today. I just received a message also in the Q&A feed that there might be a little technical problem with the booking of the inquiries. So we will double check on that. And at least when we are sending out the presentation, we will take care that it's working smoothly and that you can book your sessions accordingly. So sorry for any inconvenience here. So thanks again for your time. I hope it was insightful, and we stay in touch. And don't forget to celebrate the 50th anniversary with you at any occasion where we can have a beer or a glass of wine on short notice. Thank you, goodbye, and take care.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Goodbye.